A quiet dread settles in the heart of every new night messenger. Ilara's hands tremble as she accepts the star lantern from the elder storyteller, a vessel holding a mere fragment of our world's fading light. Her journey is not a grand quest, but a gentle one, a solitary walk into the growing twilight, where the weight of untraded stories and the hope of her entire village rests on her shoulders. By the end of her story, you will understand how the smallest spark of courage can rekindle the light for everyone. Wherever you are listening from, and whatever the hour is there, I wonder what you would carry to keep the dark at bay. The overgrown path seems to swallow her footsteps whole. Ilara's world has shrunk to the small circle of light cast by her star lantern, a beacon that makes the surrounding shadows feel all the more alive. Every rustle in the undergrowth is a potential threat, every snap of a twig a reason for her heart to leap into her throat. The dancing shadows thrown by her lantern are no longer playful, but seem to twist into grasping shapes that watch her progress with silent intent. Fear is her only companion, a cold weight in her chest that makes each breath a conscious effort. So she does the only thing she can think to do, a small rebellion against the silence. She begins to hum. It is an old lullaby, one her grandmother sang, the notes shaky and thin at first. But as the familiar melody leaves her lips, something shifts. The act itself is a kind of courage. The sound, however fragile, pushes back against the oppressive quiet. Her breathing steadies, matching the rhythm of the song. The melody becomes a shield, not a strong one, but a reminder. It carries the memory of warm hearths and safe hands, of the village and all the stories waiting to be traded. It reminds her why she must continue, one step at a time, toward the first shelter. The creak of the door is a lonely sound in the vast quiet. Ilara steps across the threshold of the first shelter, a small stone hut nestled beneath a grove of ancient pines. The air inside is thick with the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. An old keeper sits by the hearth, his gnarled hands patiently mending a fishing net. He does not look up, does not speak a word of welcome. His silence is a wall, a test she must pass. Ilara understands this is not a place for pleasantries, but for purpose. With a steadying breath, she walks to the rough-hewn central table and places her star lantern upon it. The small flame within flickers, then swells, casting a warm, golden glow that pushes the shadows into the corners of the room. This is her invitation. She begins to speak. Her voice is quiet at first, recounting the tale of the weeping willow, a story from her own village. She tells of the great tree that grew by the river, its branches forever drooping in sorrow after it lost its reflection in a great flood. She describes how the children of the village would sing to it each evening, and how, over time, the tree's leaves began to shimmer with a new kind of light, a gentle silver that was not a reflection of the sun or moon, but of the kindness it was given. As she speaks, something shifts. Her voice finds its rhythm, gaining strength and conviction. The words are no longer just a recitation, they are an offering. She watches as the keeper's stern face softens, the hard lines around his eyes easing. He sets his mending aside, his full attention now on her and the story. When she finishes, the silence in the hut is different. It is no longer empty, but full. The keeper gives a slow, deliberate nod. He reaches into a pouch at his belt and produces a single, tightly closed pine cone. He places it on the table beside her lantern. As Alara picks it up, she feels a faint vibration against her palm, a soft hum that carries the fresh, clean scent of a long-remembered rain. It is a token, a story traded and accepted. Her first connection is made, and the light in her lantern seems to burn just a little brighter, a little warmer, as she steps back out into the twilight. The hum of the pine cone, a quiet companion for the road ahead. The pine cone hummed a quiet song against her palm, a small, living thing full of rain and memory. It was Fen, the old keeper, who finally broke the long, comfortable silence that had settled between them. His voice was like the rustle of dry leaves, low and textured. "You carry a story well," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But a true messenger learns to receive them too." "Come," he gestured for her to sit by the hearth, not on a chair, but on the worn stone floor itself. "Press your ear to the wood," he instructed, pointing to a great, dark beam that spanned the ceiling. Alara, curious, knelt and did as he asked. At first, there was only the solid, unyielding silence of timber, but as she focused, as she let her own breathing slow to match the deep, slow rhythm of the shelter, she began to hear it. A faint, resonant hum, a vibration that was not a sound but a feeling, carrying the memory of 1,000 winds that had passed through the pines outside, the sigh of countless seasons held deep within the grain. Fen nodded slowly, a knowing look in his eyes. "Now the chimney," he whispered. She moved, placing her hand flat against the rough stone of the hearth. Here, the story was different. It was a tale of warmth and farewell, a soft, mournful exhalation that spoke of countless fires that had burned here, of conversations held in the glow, of heat given and then released back into the night. "These are not my stories to keep," Fen explained, his gaze steady on her. "They are the Waystations' own. I am merely their custodian. Your task is not just to bring a tale and leave with another. It is to listen, to truly hear the one that is already here, waiting. A story is a living breath. It must be both given and received to have any meaning at all." In that moment, Alara's understanding of her journey fractured and reassembled itself into something new and far more profound. She was not a simple courier on a linear path. She was a single note in a vast, ancient song, a participant in a cycle that depended as much on her ability to listen and feel as it did on her courage to speak. She was not just carrying light, she was learning how to become a part of it. The path out of the pine grove was a ribbon of frost-slicked cobblestones. Alara left the shelter's lingering warmth behind as the air grew sharp and thin, each breath a small, visible cloud. She clutched the humming pine cone tightly in her palm, its gentle vibration, a memory of warm rain that felt like a dream from another world. This small token was a physical manifestation of the comfort she was leaving behind, a stark contrast to the biting cold that now sought to seep into her bones. It was a reminder that her duty required moving forward, not staying safe. She could not rely on the warmth of a hearth or the guidance of a keeper now. She had to generate her own warmth, to find the heat of courage and purpose within herself. Her steps were careful on the icy stones, but they were sure. The star lantern's light seemed to contract, pulling in close against the deepening chill, a small, defiant sun in the vast, cold dark. Every shiver that ran through her was a battle, and every time she focused on the steady hum in her hand, she won a small victory. The journey was teaching her that the most essential warmth does not come from an external fire, but from the stubborn, resilient spark you carry inside, a fire that the cold itself cannot extinguish, only define. The cobblestones gave way to a sheer drop, a ravine splitting the land like a dark scar. Arcing over the abyss was a bridge of pale, weathered stone, its surface a tapestry of countless names carved by hands long gone. Alara stepped onto it, the cold of the ancient rock seeping through her boots. As the light of her star lantern fell upon the first carved letters, they began to glow with a faint, ethereal blue. A whisper brushed against her ear, the ghost of a sentence from a story she had never heard. Then another, and another. Within moments, the air was thick with a chaotic chorus, 100 spectral voices speaking over one another, each one a fragment of a tale left untold, a life unremembered. It was a storm of forgotten echoes, a king's final decree tangled with a child's nursery rhyme. A declaration of love was drowned out by a merchant's final bargain. The pressure built inside her skull, a dizzying cacophony that threatened to pull her apart, to scatter her own thoughts into the noise. She clutched her lantern tighter, her knuckles white. She could not listen to them all. To try would be to lose herself completely. So she closed her eyes, shutting out the swirling lights, and focused inward. She found the steady rhythm of her own breathing. She reached for the solid memory of the tale of the weeping willow, for the clean scent of the humming pine cone, for the deep, resonant song of the shelter's timber. She anchored herself in the story she carried, the story she was. One step, then another. She did not fight the whispers, but let them flow around her like a river around a stone. She moved through the storm of echoes, not by adding to the noise, but by holding fast to her own quiet center. When her feet finally met solid ground on the far side, the voices faded to a distant sigh, then to silence. The bridge stood dark behind her. Her mind felt scoured clean, her purpose honed to a sharp, brilliant point. The chaos had not broken her. It had taught her how to hold her own light, and in doing so, she had learned to walk through a world of ghosts without becoming one. A faint, rhythmic glow pulsed through the wall of fog, a silent beacon drawing Alara from the stark silence of the bridge. The mist parted to reveal a waystation, unlike the first, its low walls built directly into a moss-draped hillside. It seemed less a construction and more a slow, organic growth from the land itself. The air was heavy with the rich perfume of wet soil and something else, something dry and fragile, the scent of old, well-handled paper. A woman stood in the arched doorway, her form almost merging with the shadows and moss. She did not speak a greeting. Instead, she held up a single, gnarled hand, her palm facing Alara, and in a voice as soft as rustling parchment, she uttered her first riddle. You carry a box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. What is it? Alara's mind, still raw from the chaotic whispers of the bridge, scrambled for purchase. A box, she thought of chests and lockets, but the description fit none of them. Her eyes dropped to the star lantern in her own hand, a vessel of light, with no lock, no key. The golden treasure within. An egg, she answered, her voice tentative. The keeper gave a slow, deliberate blink, the only sign of acknowledgement. She stepped aside, allowing Alara to enter the earthy-smelling shelter. Inside, the central table was a slab of living stone, its surface worn smooth by time. Alara placed her lantern upon it, and as the light bloomed, she saw that the walls were not bare rock, but were covered in delicate, silvery script, words carved into the very moss. The keeper approached again, her movements fluid and silent. She pointed a long finger first at Alara's lantern, then at her own chest, over her heart. My life can be measured in hours. I serve by being devoured. Wind, I am not. What am I? This was a different kind of test entirely. Fen had asked for her story, and for her listening. This woman demanded a different currency, understanding. Alara could not simply recite a memorized tale. She had to think, to unravel the puzzle presented to her. She looked from the lantern's flame, which was slowly consuming its wick and oil, to the patient, waiting face of the keeper. A candle, she said, the answer clicking into place. The keeper's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. She gestured for Alara to sit, then placed a simple, earthenware cup of steaming liquid before her. The final riddle came not as a question, but as a statement woven into the steam rising from the cup. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with the wind. What am I? Alara held the warm cup, the heat seeping into her chilled fingers. She thought of the bridge, of the whispers that were not true voices, of the stories carved into stone that spoke long after their carvers were gone. She thought of the tale she herself carried, the tale of the weeping willow, which would exist long after she left this place. An echo, she whispered. The keeper's smile deepened, warming her ancient eyes. She reached out and touched the star lantern, not to take it, but as a blessing. In this place of riddles, Alara had learned that a story is not just a memory or a feeling. It is a riddle waiting to be solved by the listener, a key that unlocks a new way of seeing, and its true treasure is not in the telling, but in the moment of understanding shared between two minds. The keeper's finger, pale and steady, pointed not to a carved symbol or a written word, but to the shelter's far wall. There, in the flickering glow of Alara's lantern, a colony of painted moths seemed to stir. Their wings were not mere pigment, but delicate layers of mica and crushed shell that caught the light, making them appear to flutter in a silent, eternal dance. This was the next riddle, and it demanded a different kind of answer. She could not speak a story here. She had to become one, remembering Fen's lesson, that a story is a living breath, given and received. She understood. Her trade would be one of pure light and shadow. Carefully, she lifted her star lantern, angling it so its beam fell squarely upon the wall beside the shimmering moths. Her free hand rose, fingers trembling only for a moment before they steadied. She began to shape the air. First came a tree, its branches drooping low, formed by the curl of her wrist and the splay of her fingers. Then, with a gentle, swaying motion, she mimicked the children singing, their small forms dancing in the light. She showed the tree's sorrow, and then, with a slow opening of her hand, she showed its leaves beginning to shimmer, catching a light that was not from her lantern, but from within the story itself. She traded the tale of the weeping willow without a single whispered word. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the painted moths on the wall shuddered into motion. They did not fly, for they were part of the stone, but their iridescent fragments realigned, shifting, and flowing like liquid silver. They swirled into a new image, a perfect circle surrounding a single, deep point that seemed to fall away into the wall itself. As Alara watched, mesmerized, the image did not just remain on the stone. It unfolded inside her mind. She felt the cool dampness of deep earth, heard the faint, musical plink of water dripping into a hidden pool, and knew the exact location of a secret spring, a source of pure water that had been lost to memory. It was a story of sustenance, of a gift from the earth itself, given not in words, but as a direct, vivid knowing. The silent trade was complete. The keeper gave a final, slow nod, and the moths settled back into their random, beautiful patterns. Ilara lowered her lantern, her mind now holding two stories, one she had learned by heart, and one that had been placed there, whole and complete, by a language of light and shadow. The smooth, water-worn stone felt like a piece of the earth's own quiet pulse in Ilara's palm. It was cool to the touch, and when she closed her fingers around it, she could almost hear the faint, musical murmur of the hidden spring, a secret promise held in solid form. The keeper's smile was a rare and genuine gift, a silent acknowledgement that their trade was complete. This was not a story told, but a story felt, a living memory of pure water and deep earth that she now carried with her. Leaving the mossy shelter, she understood that the tokens were more than just receipts for a story traded. They were anchors. Each one, from the humming pine cone to this murmuring stone, was a piece of a larger map, a constellation of memories that tied her not just to the path ahead, but to the world itself. They grounded her in a way that words alone never could. How many other forms could a story take? Could it be a scent on the wind, the texture of bark, the specific chill of a shadow at a certain hour? Her journey was becoming a process of learning new languages, of discovering that every stone, every stream, every gust of wind might be holding a tale, waiting only for someone who knew how to listen not with their ears, but with their entire being. The stone in her hand was a quiet companion, its low hum a constant reminder that the most profound stories are often the ones that are never spoken aloud. The murmuring stone in her pocket felt heavier than any object its size had a right to be. With every step, the story of the hidden spring resonated not as a simple memory, but as a profound and urgent responsibility. This was no longer just a tale of shimmering leaves or a keeper's riddles. It was a secret of pure water, a potential source of life for a parched land, for a thirsty traveler she might never meet. The weight of it settled deep in her soul, transforming her gentle journey into something far more significant. She was no longer merely a messenger delivering a story. She was a vessel carrying a potential future. Every footfall on the path now echoed with this new, sacred trust. The emotional stakes of her journey had just multiplied, and the quiet path ahead seemed to watch her, waiting to see if she was truly worthy of the hope she now carried in her hand. The path plunged into a gully, so deep the sky vanished, swallowed by a canopy of gnarled, interlocking branches. In this absolute dark, the star lantern was her only world. Then, without warning, it flickered. The warm, golden light guttered like a dying breath, shrinking the circle of safety around her to a wavering, sickly glow. Shadows, once held at bay, now lunged and writhed at the edge of the dimming radiance, their forms growing solid and menacing. A cold panic seized Ilara's throat, sharp and suffocating. She clutched the lantern, expecting to find it cool, but the glass was warm. It wasn't out of fuel, it was starving. In that terrifying moment, the truth crashed over her. The elder storyteller had never mentioned oil or wick. The lantern did not burn on a physical substance. It fed on the stories. It drew its strength from the resonance of the tales she carried, from the energy of their trade, from the connections she forged at each waystation. The humming pine cone, the murmuring stone, these were not just tokens. They were batteries, and she had been spending their light without realizing it. The lantern's flame was a direct reflection of the vitality of her narrative cargo, and on this long, lonely stretch between shelters, that cargo was being depleted. The shadows pressed closer, their silence now a palpable hunger. She was not just a messenger in the dark. She was the only thing keeping the dark from devouring the light entirely. Her journey had just become a race against her own fading voice. The lantern's glass grew warm against her palm as the light bled away into the hungry dark. She could not trade a story here, for there was no one to listen. She had nothing left to give but herself. Sinking to her knees on the cold path, Alara cupped the dying lantern in both hands and did the only thing left to do. She closed her eyes and poured her own hope into the vessel, not as a practiced tale, but as a raw, whispered memory. She spoke of a night from her childhood, of sitting on her grandmother's lap, the old woman's shawl smelling of lavender and wood smoke. She described the vast, velvet sky and how her grandmother had pointed to a single, bright star. That one, little one, her grandmother had whispered, that one holds all the stories that have ever been forgotten. It keeps them safe until someone is brave enough to remember them again. As Alara whispered this fragile piece of her own soul into the lantern, the flame did not just return. It erupted. A brilliant, silver-tinged light flooded the gully, so potent and pure, it made the lunging shadows recoil as if burned. The light was different now. It was not just the warm gold of the village's collective hope. It was laced with the cool, clear silver of her grandmother's star, a light that was intimately and forever hers. She had not just refueled the lantern. She had fused a part of her own spirit with its flame. The tool was no longer just a guide. It had become an extension of her will, its light now dependent not only on the stories she carried, but on the strength of the heart that carried them. This was the true cost of being a night messenger, a price paid not in sweat or fear, but in the quiet, willing surrender of one's own memories to the greater light. The path ended its steep descent, spilling her out into a small, silent clearing dominated by a single, gnarled tree whose branches clawed at the starless sky. Here, the way split. To the right, a well-trodden path wound gently downhill, its course marked by the faint, welcoming glow of distant waystation lanterns, a promise of warmth and rest. It was the road of comfort, the one that followed the known rhythm of the journey. To the left, a narrow, choked trail disappeared into an impenetrable wall of thorns and shadow. No friendly lights beckoned from that darkness, yet as Alara stood at the junction, the star lantern in her hand gave a sudden, painful throb. Its newly silvered light did not brighten, but it pulsed, a weak, insistent tugging in her palm, pulling her gaze toward the forsaken left-hand path. The lantern was not guiding her toward safety. It was straining toward a story. This was no longer about following a route. It was a question etched into the very earth. Did she trust the map of tradition, or did she trust the compass of her own purpose? The safe path promised a completed duty, a story traded, and a return home. The dark path promised nothing, but the lantern's desperate pull and the absolute certainty that something there, someone there, was fading into final silence. To take the easy road was to be a courier. To step into the thorns was to become a true messenger. Her breath misted in the cold air, a small, transient cloud. Then, without another moment of hesitation, she turned her back on the distant lights and pushed her way into the waiting dark. Thorns snatched at her cloak with a sound like tearing cloth. Each step forward was a battle against the grasping darkness, a physical push into a wall of brambles that had not felt a traveler in a very long time. The air here was thick and still, a suffocating blanket that swallowed all sound, even the frantic beat of her own heart. It was a silence that felt intentional, a presence that wanted her to forget the world of stories and light, to simply lie down and become a part of the quiet. Her star lantern, which had blazed with silver hope in the gully, was now reduced to a faint, trembling glow. It was not enough to illuminate a path, for there was no path. Its light was a tool, a blade. She thrust it forward, and the brambles directly in its beam seemed to flinch, their tangled forms recoiling from the purity of the light. Where the glow touched, the thorns did not vanish, but they shriveled and softened, becoming brittle twigs that snapped under her determined push. She was not finding a way through. She was making one. With every thrust of the lantern, she carved a few more inches of passage, her courage manifesting as a physical force against the oppressive gloom. The darkness was not empty here. It was a living resistance, and her small, defiant light was the only weapon that could fight it. This was no longer a journey of following. It was an act of creation, a testament to the simple, terrifying truth that sometimes the only way forward is to build the road yourself, one brave, illuminated step at a time. The thorns finally released their grip, spitting her out into a small, circular clearing, but the shelter at its heart was a skeleton. Its stone walls sagged inward, and the roof had surrendered long ago to the weight of time, leaving a gaping wound open to the sky. No warm scent of wood smoke or dried herbs lingered here, only the cold, damp breath of decay. This was not a place of waiting. It was a place of ending. The darkness here was different too. It did not press in from the outside. It pooled in the corners, thick and watchful, a patient silence that had settled in for a long, cold stay. And from within that deepest shadow, she heard it, a faint, broken sound, the soft, hopeless weeping of something that had forgotten how to be comforted. Ilara moved toward the sound, her boots crunching on fallen slate from the hearth. In the farthest corner, half buried in debris, lay the source. It was a lantern, or what remained of one. Its glass was shattered into a dozen jagged pieces, and the metal frame was twisted and blackened, as if it had been thrown in a terrible rage. From this ruined vessel, the weeping seemed to emanate, a shimmer of pure sorrow hanging in the air above the broken glass. She knelt, not daring to touch it, as the light from her own star lantern fell upon the fragments. A vision unfolded not in words, but in a sudden, crushing feeling. She saw two hands, one placing a smooth, white stone into the other. A promise was made, a vow to return before the next full moon, but the moon cycled again and again, and the one who left never came back. The white stone waited, its surface growing cold, until the hope it represented curdled into a grief so profound it shattered the very vessel meant to hold it. This was not a story that could be traded. It was a wound. There was no riddle to solve, no performance to give. The story was broken, and its only remaining need was to be witnessed. So Alara did not speak. She did not offer a tale of her own. She simply sat in the ruin, her own light holding back the sentient dark, and she listened. She let the sorrow wash over her, acknowledging its truth, its pain, its right to exist. She gave the forgotten story the one thing it had been denied all this time, a compassionate silence. And in that quiet exchange, the weeping slowly began to fade. The weeping faded into a silence that felt less like an ending and more like a held breath. Alara looked from the shards of the broken lantern to the steady flame in her own. She could not trade. The story here was too wounded for that kind of transaction. It needed something with no expectation of return, so she drew a slow breath and began to speak, her voice soft but clear in the ruined shelter. She did not tell a grand myth from her village. She offered a small, quiet memory from her own life. She spoke of a time she had promised her younger sister she would return from a trip to the high meadows with a feather from a sky hawk. She told of searching for days, of the disappointment when no feather was found, and of the moment just before returning home when she saw a single perfect gray and white feather caught in a spiderweb, glistening with dew. It was a tiny thing, a kept promise that meant the world to one small girl. As she finished, the air above the shattered glass shivered. A single, radiant tear of light, like liquid silver, welled up from the fragments and fell, not onto the stone floor, but directly into the heart of Alara's own star lantern. The flame did not roar, but it deepened, its light gaining a soft, resilient warmth it had not possessed before. This was not a story added to her collection. It was a lesson absorbed directly into her soul. Compassion was not a tool for fixing what was broken. It was the quiet act of sitting with the break, of sharing the weight of it without trying to carry it away. A true story could be a gift given freely, and its value was not in what you received, but in the connection its giving forged. The silver-tinged light from her lantern had never felt so warm, so full. It was a comfort she had earned not through a clever trade, but through a quiet gift, and it filled the ruined shelter with a gentle, resilient glow. But that very act, that pure and untraded kindness, had created a beacon in the desolate dark. As she stepped back from the broken lantern, the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing began to stir. They did not retreat from her light. They coalesced. From the forgotten sorrows and every neglected tale that had ever faded into silence, a presence drew itself together. It was not a beast with claws and teeth. It was a shifting, silent shadow, taller than a man and utterly without form, a hole in the world that drank the sound around it. It did not attack. It did not make a threatening move. It simply began to follow her, matching her pace as she retreated from the clearing, a patient, looming shape just beyond the circle of her lantern's reach. This was the consequence of her deepest empathy. By healing one broken story, she had made herself a shining target for every other story that had been left to rot, a magnet for the collective hunger of all the tales that had never been heard. Her compassion had not only refueled her lantern, it had summoned a witness to that power, and this new companion in the dark was a reminder that some silences are not empty. Some silences are waiting. Her breath hitched as she broke into a run, the path a blur beneath her feet. The shadow did not give chase in the way a wolf would. It flowed, a dark tide that simply kept pace, its silent presence a pressure against her back. She could feel its nature now, not as malice, but as a profound, hollow yearning. It was an emptiness that reached for the warmth and weight of the stories in her lantern, a vacuum trying to fill itself with her light. Instinctively, her hand curled protectively around the star lantern, shielding its glow with her own body. She hunched her shoulders, turning the vessel away from the pursuing dark, a futile attempt to hide a sunbeam in a cupboard. This simple, desperate act transformed everything. Her gentle journey was over. It was a flight now. Every frantic heartbeat was a reminder that she was not just a messenger, but a guardian. The light was no longer just a guide. It was a treasure she had to protect from a hunger that could not be reasoned with. How do you share a story when the very act of sharing might draw a predator? How do you fulfill your purpose when showing your light is the most dangerous thing you can do? Her pace was a frantic rhythm against the hard ground, a stark contrast to the shadow's silent, effortless glide. It was testing her, not with claws, but with a terrible, patient need, forcing her to learn the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most precious things must be hidden away, kept safe even from those who seem to want them most. The path ahead was no longer about finding the next way station. It was about outrunning the echo of every story ever lost, and she was its only remaining hope. The river appeared as a sudden, shimmering scar across the land. Its surface was a perfect, unbroken mirror, holding the entire starry sky captive in its dark, placid waters. The shadow that had flowed so relentlessly at her heels stopped dead at the bank. It did not recoil in anger, but seemed to falter, its form rippling uncertainly before the flawless reflection. It could not cross this boundary of pure image, this celestial truth written upon the water. For the first time since the thorns, Alara was granted a moment of stillness, a fragile respite bought by starlight. But her path lay on the other side. Steeling herself, she stepped into the current. The water was bitingly cold, a shock that stole her breath, and with her first step, the perfect mirror shattered. Her boot plunged through a constellation, sending ripples racing outward to distort the entire sky. The stars wavered and bled into one another, their perfect order dissolving into chaos. She had to keep moving, each step a fresh violation of the peace. As she waded deeper, the water settling around her knees, she was forced to look down. There, in the disturbed surface, was her own reflection, but it was not the steadfast messenger she hoped to see. The face looking back was fractured, its eyes wide with a fear she had refused to acknowledge. The silver in her lantern's light, earned through compassion, now seemed like a desperate gamble. Had her detour into the thorns been courage, or merely foolish pride? Had her gift to the broken story been an act of wisdom, or had it needlessly drawn the attention of the silent, hungering thing now waiting on the shore? Every doubt she had buried under the rhythm of her steps now rose to the surface, given form in her own wavering image. The river was not an obstacle of water, but a trial of self. To cross it, she had to walk through a storm of her own making, watching her conviction distort and reform with every uncertain movement forward. The far bank seemed an impossible distance away, a promise of solid ground that felt more like a memory than a destination. The far bank offered a different kind of silence, one cleansed by the river's cold embrace. Nestled against a low cliff of dark, polished stone was a waystation that seemed spun from the night itself. Its walls were open to the sky, and at its heart lay a pool of water so still and dark, it was impossible to tell where the stone ended and the water began. The entire cosmos was captured on its surface, a perfect, shimmering map of the heavens. An old woman sat at the pool's edge, her silver hair echoing the starry patterns above. She was an astronomer, her fingers tracing invisible lines between the pinpricks of light, her trade not in riddles or memories, but in the grand stories written in the sky. She looked up as Alara approached, her eyes holding the same deep, patient light as the pool. "You carry a story of the deep earth," she said, her voice a soft hum. "The water knows its echo. Will you trade its map for one of the sky?" Alara understood. The murmuring stone in her pocket was a story of what lies below. Here, she could trade it for a story of what lies above. She knelt beside the astronomer and placed the stone upon the dark, reflective water. It did not sink. Instead, it floated, and as it did, the story of the hidden spring unfolded not in words or feelings, but in light. A new constellation bloomed upon the water's surface, a delicate, interwoven pattern of stars that formed a complex, beautiful knot. The astronomer smiled. "This is the storyteller's knot," she said. "It does not point to a single destination. It is a map of connection, a guide to finding those who are waiting to hear your tale, and those whose tales are waiting for you." With a gentle scoop of her hand, the woman lifted the pattern of light from the water, and as she pressed it toward Alara's star lantern, the silver flame within reached out, drawing the constellation inside. The lantern did not grow brighter, but its light became more focused, more intentional. It now held a story of guidance, a celestial promise that she would never truly be lost, that every path, no matter how dark, was part of a larger, connected whole. She had traded a secret of the earth for a secret of the heavens, and in doing so, her journey became woven into the fabric of the night itself. The astronomer's fingers paused over the starry pool, her gaze fixed on Alara with a sudden and profound gravity. "That which follows you is no mere creature of darkness," she said, her voice losing its soft hum and gaining the weight of carved stone. "It is an ancient hunger, born in the silences between stories. It grows in the hollows left by tales that were kept, not given, by narratives clutched too tightly to a single heart until they withered and died." Her eyes drifted to the star lantern, its light now laced with silver and the new pattern of the storyteller's knot. "And you, little messenger, have become a beacon. You carry not one story, but many, a concentrated well of light and meaning. To that shadow, you are a feast. It does not hunt you out of malice, but out of a desperate, empty need to consume what it can no longer create. Your journey was never a simple delivery. It is a race against this decay. For every story left unshared, the silence grows stronger, and the path for the next messenger grows darker. You are not just carrying light. You are fighting the tide of forgetting itself." The weight of the astronomer's words settled in Alara's bones, a cold truth that left no room for fear, only for choice. She looked from the starry pool to her own lantern, a vessel now holding a map of celestial connections. To keep its light solely for herself was to feed the very decay she was meant to fight. A pact was needed, a sacrifice for the path itself. She met the keeper's ancient gaze. "I will leave a piece of the knot here," she said, her voice steady. "A spark for those who come after." The astronomer nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. This was not a trade, but a sowing. Ilara cupped her hands around the star lantern, feeling the warmth of its fused light. The village gold, her grandmother's silver, the resonant hum of the earth, and now the guiding pattern of the stars. She focused on the storyteller's knot, that beautiful, complex map of connection, and willed a single, shining thread of it to separate from the whole. As she did, the light within her lantern visibly dimmed. The flame guttered low, its radiance shrinking back toward the wick as if wounded. A palpable wave of weakness washed over her, a sudden and profound vulnerability. But she did not stop. She guided that excised thread of starry light from her lantern and let it fall into the dark pool. It did not vanish. It sank into the water and anchored itself to the stone below, a new, permanent star igniting in the pool's reflected sky. A waypoint was born. This small, brave act had strengthened the entire network of Waystations, creating a new point of reference and hope for every night messenger who would ever pass this way. But the cost was immediate and terrifying. As her diminished light wavered, the shadow on the far riverbank, which had been held at bay by the water's reflection, began to stir with renewed purpose. It had felt her momentary weakness, a flicker in the beacon that made her irresistible. Ilara had traded a portion of her own safety to make the world a little less dark for others, and the silence she had fed was now hungrier than ever. The path beyond the river felt narrower, the darkness thicker, as if her sacrifice had given the silence more substance. It was the voice of her younger sister that came first, a small, plaintive cry from the shadows to her left. "Ilara, I'm lost. Please, come find me." The sound was so real, so perfectly captured in its childish tremor, that her heart clenched and her feet faltered for a single, treacherous moment. She knew it was a lie, a phantom spun from the shadow's hunger, yet the instinct to turn, to run toward the sound of a loved one in distress, was a physical ache in her chest. This was a different kind of attack, one that did not claw at her cloak, but at the very bonds that gave her journey meaning. Another voice joined the first, this one the warm, weathered tone of her grandmother. "Child, you are going the wrong way. The true path is here in the light. Come back to me." An image flickered at the edge of her vision, a cozy hearth that smelled of baking bread and safety. The illusions were a cruel genius. They did not threaten her. They offered her everything she secretly longed for: resolution, reunion, an end to the solitary struggle. They used her own love as a weapon, twisting her deepest attachments into snares. To ignore them felt like a betrayal of her own heart. Each step forward was an act of will against a tidal pull of fabricated memory. She focused on the star lantern, on the faint, steady pattern of the storyteller's knot within its flame. She reminded herself that the real versions of these people were safe, their true stories waiting for her return. The voices grew more desperate, more pleading, layering over one another in a heartbreaking chorus of fabricated need. The shadow was not trying to break her body. It was trying to shatter her resolve by convincing her that her duty was a betrayal of her love. It was a battle fought entirely within the quiet spaces of her own mind, and every time she chose the lonely path over the seductive illusion, she felt a piece of the phantom chorus dissolve back into the hungry dark. Her grandmother's voice wove through the dark, so rich with warmth and remembered love that Alara's steps faltered. The illusion promised a chair by the fire, a bowl of stew, an end to the cold and the fear. It was a perfect trap, crafted from her own deepest affection. But as the phantom words washed over her, her hand closed around the cool, smooth stone in her pocket. Its quiet hum was a thread leading back to reality, to the hidden spring, and the true memory of her grandmother, who had always spoken of courage, not comfort. And then she saw it, a tiny, impossible flaw. The false grandmother was telling the tale of the weeping willow, but she described the children singing at noon. The real story, the one Alara had carried from her village, happened only at dusk, when the fading light made the leaves shimmer. It was a detail known only to her, a secret kept within the story itself. That small, deliberate error shattered the beautiful lie. She planted her feet and shouted the truth into the oppressive dark. They sang at dusk. The words were not loud, but they were absolute, a blade of pure fact. The loving voice cut off mid-sentence. The shadow itself flinched back, its form rippling as if struck. It was not wounded by her volume, but by the integrity of her memory. She had refused to let her love be used as a weapon. In that moment, she understood that the most potent light against this particular darkness was not brilliance, but authenticity. The shadow could mimic her affections, but it could not replicate the sacred, unshakable truth of a story held in a faithful heart. The ground beneath her feet turned to damp, uneven stone. The path sloped downward, swallowed by the gaping mouth of a cavern, its entrance fringed with phosphorescent moss that cast a sickly green glow. This was the threshold of the Weeping Caves. Inside, the world transformed. Jagged crystals thrust from the walls and ceiling, their facets glittering with the same faint, eerie light. It was beautiful, in a terrible, suffocating way. The air was thick and still, and every sound was captured, twisted, and amplified. The cautious scuff of her boot on the wet rock echoed into a long, scraping slide. The drip of water from a stalactite became a percussive, maddening beat, and then the shadow entered behind her. Its silent presence became a physical force of noise. A deafening roar of static, like a waterfall of shattered glass, filled the cavern, punctuated by the clear, desperate whispers of every story it had ever consumed. She could hear the king's final decree, the child's rhyme, the merchant's bargain, all screaming over one another in a chaotic, soul-rending chorus. It was no longer a pursuit. It was a sensory assault that hammered against her skull, making thought almost impossible. Her vision blurred, the confusing light of the moss and crystals swimming before her eyes. She could not navigate by sight. She had to shut it out. Closing her eyes against the visual and auditory storm, she pressed her body against the cold, wet wall of the cave. Her free hand, trembling, groped ahead, finding the rough, sharp edges of the rock. She moved by touch alone, each step a blind act of faith. The star lantern was her only anchor, its diminished flame a small, warm pulse against her chest, a sensation she focused on to keep from screaming. The roar of the shadow was so immense it felt like a pressure, threatening to crush her lungs, but the gentle heat of the lantern against her skin was a quiet truth she could still feel, a whisper of purpose beneath the world-ending noise. She inched forward, a tiny, feeling creature in a cathedral of amplified madness, her entire world reduced to the next handhold and the next step, trusting the path her fingers found in the dark. Her fingers found the edge of the passage, and the roaring chaos fell away into a profound, humming silence. The cavern opened into a chamber so immense its ceiling was lost in darkness, and at its heart lay a sight that stole her breath. A geode, larger than any house, pulsed with a soft, captured light. Its crystalline interior was a vortex, a silent, spinning storm where countless shards of light, fragments of stories, memories, and whispers traced endless, desperate circles. They were all there, the tales consumed by the silence, their colors muted and their voices stilled, trapped in a beautiful, terrible prison. And at the very center of this vortex, the shadow gathered itself. It was no longer a formless pursuer. Here, it had drawn its full substance from the stolen light, a being of concentrated absence, a perfect void shaped from every story that had ever been forgotten. This was the source of the hunger she had been fleeing, the final, living obstacle between her and the completion of her journey. It did not move to attack. It simply waited, its silent presence, a question that filled the entire chamber. How do you fight a thing that is made from everything you have sworn to protect? How do you bring light to a darkness that is, itself, composed of extinguished light? Her own star lantern felt impossibly small, its flame a fragile heartbeat against the vast, spinning silence. To go forward was to step into the belly of the beast, to offer her own story to the very maw that had devoured so many others. Yet every trapped fragment in that vortex was a reason to continue, a silent plea from a world growing quieter by the day. This was not an enemy to be defeated, but a consequence to be faced, and the fate of every future story now rested on the one she had yet to give. A voice formed from the silence, not as a roar, but as a chillingly reasonable whisper that resonated in her very bones. I have consumed 10,000 forgotten tales, but I have never been full. Give them to me. Leave your stories here, and I will grant you passage. The path ahead will be clear. You may return to your village, your duty complete. It was the most terrible temptation yet. It offered not an illusion of comfort, but the reality of survival, a clean end to the struggle. To fight this entity was impossible. It was the ocean, and she was a single, fragile boat. To surrender the stories was to save herself, but condemn the world to a deeper, more permanent twilight. Her duty and her survival were suddenly, horrifically, at odds. Her hand trembled around the star lantern, its light feeling thin and pale against the vast, spinning vortex of stolen tales. She could not win a battle of force. She could not accept a truce of emptiness. There was only one path left, one that had been woven into the very fabric of her journey. She would not fight, and she would not surrender. She would invite. Alara raised the lantern high, not as a weapon, but as a loom. She closed her eyes and began to speak, but her voice was different now. It did not recite, it wove. She took the tale of the weeping willow and threaded it with the memory of her grandmother's star. She intertwined the fresh scent of the pine cone's rain with the deep, resonant hum of the shelter's timber. She laced the cool certainty of the murmuring stone with the celestial guidance of the storyteller's knot. She did not tell one story after another. She spun them into a single, shimmering narrative, a tapestry where the kindness shown to a tree was connected to the promise of a hidden spring, where a personal memory of a feather was as vital as a map of the heavens. She was not offering the shadow a meal, she was offering it a place in the pattern. She was showing it that its own existence, its hunger born from lost tales, was itself a part of the grand, interconnected story it sought to consume. The light from her lantern did not attack the darkness. It began, slowly, to reweave it. The vortex of stolen light began to fray at the edges. A single shard, a forgotten lullaby, broke from its endless circle and flew toward Alara's voice. Then another, a fragment of a lost king's courage, followed, and then another. They did not crash into her tapestry. They slipped into it, their muted colors brightening, their silent voices finding a place in the grand, interwoven pattern she was creating. The light in the chamber did not just grow, it changed. It was no longer the single, defiant flame of her star lantern, but a collective radiance, a living constellation born from 1,000 stories reunited. The shadow recoiled, not in pain, but in a kind of awe. It had spent eons consuming narratives one by one, swallowing them into its solitary silence. But here was something it had never encountered, a story that was all stories, a narrative so vast and interconnected that it could not be consumed, only acknowledged. To try and swallow this web would be to try and drink the ocean. The void that was the shadow did not fight the light. It was unmade by it. The form that had been a perfect absence began to fill, not with substance, but with meaning. Its darkness softened, becoming the deep, respectful hush of an audience waiting for the tale to begin. It settled at the edge of the glowing geode, a silent, attentive witness to the story it could never hold, its ancient hunger finally stilled by the one thing it could not possess, connection. The chaotic vortex of light settled into a single, shimmering pattern, a living tapestry that pulsed softly in the heart of the vast cavern. From its very center, the great crystal of the geode detached itself with a sound like a distant chime. It floated gently into Alara's waiting palm, cool and surprisingly light. Within its multifaceted depths, the entire story tapestry was captured in miniature, every thread of her journey perfectly preserved. The willow's sorrow, the pine's rain, the river's cold truth, and the astronomer's starry map, all woven together with the silver of her own hope. This was no ordinary token. It was the Geode's gift, a master story of connection and resilience, its light not blazing, but deep and endlessly layered. She had not seized it through force or clever bargaining. It had been given, a direct consequence of her willingness to understand the silence rather than simply fight it. This was the ultimate prize, earned not in battle, but in the selfless act of sharing her own narrative so completely that it made room for every other lost tale, creating a new whole from the fragments of the forgotten. The crystal hummed in her hand, a quiet, potent vibration that was not one story, but the story of how all stories belong to one another. The air outside the cave tasted of dew and pine. A familiar world returned to her, yet utterly transformed. Alara stepped into the twilight, and the path before her was no longer a ribbon of shadows, but a road of soft, welcoming light. The star lantern in her hand did not cast a beam. It simply was light, a calm, eternal flame that radiated from its core, illuminating the way not by pushing back the dark, but by revealing that the dark itself was now a gentle companion. The fear that had once coiled in her stomach was gone, replaced by a profound and quiet certainty. Her journey home was not a retreat. It was a different kind of pilgrimage, a walk through a world she now understood intimately. her very presence a comfort to the landscape. Soon, she began to see the mother figures on the path, their own lanterns flickering with the tentative, guttering light of early courage. A young man, his face pale with fear, clutched a lantern that threatened to die with every other step. Ilara did not stop to deliver a grand speech. She simply walked beside him for a moment, and as her own steady light fell upon his lantern, a single bright spark leapt from her flame to his. His light did not roar into brilliance, but it steadied, gaining a resilient core that would not be so easily extinguished. He met her eyes with a look of stunned gratitude before continuing on his way, a little taller, a little surer. She did this again and again. For a woman struggling to decipher a trail marker, Ilara offered not directions, but a moment of shared silence, her presence reinforcing the other's own inner compass. Each time she gave away a spark, her own lantern did not dim. It seemed to grow richer, its eternal flame fed by the act of sharing itself. She was no longer a solitary messenger fighting the silence. She had become a waystation in motion, a living proof that the light grows not by being hoarded, but by being given freely. The gentle journey had come full circle, and in guiding others, she found the final, most profound reassurance of all. A final light shone between the ancient oaks, a small, steady beacon that felt like a homecoming. The last waystation was a simple structure, its wooden walls worn smooth by generations of messengers, and the door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the air was still, holding the faint, sweet scent of milk and candle wax. A child sat alone at the central table, their small hands clenched into fists on the worn wood, their eyes wide not with wonder, but with a deep, lingering fear. This was the keeper, a small soul besieged by nightmares, waiting not for a grand myth, but for a story strong enough to guard their dreams. The final test of her journey was not a riddle or a trial of strength, but a quiet exchange of courage. Ilara knelt, bringing herself to the child's eye level. She did not bring out the glowing geode with its vast, cosmic tapestry. That story was too large, too complex, for this small, personal darkness. Instead, she cupped her hands as if holding a tiny, fragile bird. From the depths of the geode's captured light, she gently pulled a single, shimmering thread, the story of her own fear in the gully when her lantern had nearly failed. She offered this one, pure memory, the sensation of cold panic, the looming shadows, and the defiant act of whispering a grandmother's star into the dying light. She traded the story of how courage is not the absence of fear, but the simple, stubborn decision to kindle a light anyway. As she spoke, the small, bright spark of the story drifted from her palms and settled in the child's own tiny lantern, which until then had held only a weak, guttering flame. The child watched, transfixed, as the spark took root. The fear in their eyes did not vanish in a flash, but it slowly, gently unraveled. It was replaced by a dawning recognition, a profound wonder that here was a story that understood their own secret dread. The child's lantern brightened, its light becoming steady and warm, casting a safe, golden circle around the table. In that quiet room, the cycle was complete. She had arrived a novice, her hands trembling with the weight of a single village tale. She departed a master storyteller, having learned that the greatest stories are not those of epic battles, but the small, resilient sparks we offer to another's darkness, watching as they kindle into a light that can last a lifetime. The village square lay hushed under the twilight sky, but the silence felt different now, no longer empty, but expectant. Alara knelt in the familiar dust, the same ground where her own hands had trembled only a journey ago. She did not place the geode with ceremony, but with the gentle finality of a seed meeting soil. As it settled, its light bloomed outward, not as a flash, but as a soft, perpetual radiance that pushed back the deep shadows of the square. This was no longer just a beacon. It was a library. Within its crystalline heart, the entire tapestry of her journey pulsed, a living archive where any villager could come, and by placing a hand upon its warm surface, feel the resonance of 1,000 interwoven stories. The tale of the weeping willow was there, braided with the scent of pine rain and the chill of the starlit river. A child could find courage in the memory of a nearly extinguished lantern, and an elder could trace the celestial patterns of the storyteller's knot. The fracture in the world's narrative, the silence that had been growing, had been mended not by a single grand act, but by this quiet, continuous offering of shared light. Later, she sat by the central fire, the same one where the elder storyteller had first entrusted her with the star lantern. She did not sit at his feet, but beside him, her posture that of an equal. Their conversation was a low, comfortable murmur, a trading of insights between two weavers who understood the weight and the weave of tales. She was no longer the night messenger, a title for a solitary traveler. She was the weaver of tales, a keeper of connections, and as a new, anxious face approached the fire, its eyes wide with the dread of the coming journey, Alara leaned forward, ready to guide the next soul through the lantern-lit waystations of the night.
you.